Hello, I'm Sophia, 34 years old, and recently I found some quiet moments to reflect. I thought it might be time to share the story of how I stood up to my overbearing ex-husband, Charles. Let's start at the beginning. Charles and I met shortly after I graduated from college. At a party hosted by a mutual friend, we hit it off right away, and what followed was an easy, natural connection that turned into a relationship. After 4 blissful years, we decided to get married, sure of the bond we shared. For a long time, my relationship with Charles was a comfort. He was attentive and made me feel like my happiness came first. However, I overlooked the financial dynamics in our marriage. While Charles worked a regular job, his income was significantly lower than mine. Despite that, he bought a house, taking on a hefty mortgage and numerous bills. Wanting to support him, I agreed to take on the financial burden. Everything changed when I became pregnant about a year into our marriage. Though the pregnancy was unplanned, we were excited and welcomed the news. 8 months later, our daughter Julie was born. But after Julie's arrival, Charles's attitude shifted. He insisted I quit my job to care for her, and though I hesitated, I eventually agreed, thinking it would be best for her early years. At first, I was overjoyed bonding with Julie, but it didn't take long before Charles's expectations at home became unreasonable. He demanded a spotless house and timely meals, ignoring the enormous effort it took to care for a newborn. No matter how hard I tried to meet these demands, I couldn't keep up, and Charles's temper grew more volatile. I defended myself, explaining the challenges of caring for a baby, especially since Charles never helped with nighttime feedings, leaving me to handle it alone while he slept. After enduring his outbursts for over a year, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I needed to reclaim my voice and space in our marriage. We faced significant financial strain during that first year, but thankfully I had savings to rely on. Still, draining my savings wasn't a long-term solution. I realized I needed to contribute more actively to our financial stability, so one evening after Charles came home from work, I decided to have a serious conversation. I approached him carefully, saying, "I've been thinking, and there's something important I need to discuss. Can we talk?" Charles, exhausted from his day, agreed, though he asked me to keep it brief. I shared that I wanted to return to work, emphasizing that it had been a year since Julie was born and it felt like the right time for me to contribute financially again. Charles didn't take my suggestion well. He was upset and claimed it wasn't my place to make such decisions without consulting him. He even expressed concern about how my working might make him look to others, fearing it would signal he couldn't provide for our family. I couldn't understand why he cared so much about what others thought instead of focusing on what was best for our family. Why does it matter what others think? Shouldn't we focus on what's best for us and ensuring Julie has everything she needs? I argued, but Charles insisted we wait longer, claiming it was for our best interests. However, it was clear it was more about his ego and how he wanted to be perceived. Frustrated, I stood firm in asserting my right to make decisions about my career and our family's future. I pointed out that my thoughts and desires mattered too. The conversation escalated when Charles hinted he might leave if things didn't go his way, accusing me of not caring about his feelings. I was taken aback. Was he threatening to leave over this? It was clear that this wasn't just about me going back to work, it was about his inability to see beyond his ego and consider what was best for our family. That moment marked a turning point for me. I realized I needed to assert my independence and prioritize our needs over his outdated notions of pride. I knew I had to take drastic steps. If Charles thought threatening to leave was the way to get my attention, I had to show him that I cared about his feelings, but that his emotions could not always come first. When you start valuing my feelings, I'll reciprocate, I told him firmly. His response was extreme, and I was left in shock. After our heated exchange, Charles simply walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. It was as if the conversation never happened. In the following days, I seethed with anger, but it also became clear to me that Charles was hardly around. He didn't seem interested in my daily life, and it became apparent he was disconnected from everything I was doing. That's when I decided to revisit an old hobby, embroidery. I began turning it into a small side business. Charles occasionally noticed me working on it but never asked about it. Gradually, my resentment towards him lessened, but the reality that our marriage was falling apart became undeniable. I was determined that Julie would never go through the same painful aftermath of a divorce that I had, so I kept pushing forward, undeterred. For the next 4 years, Charles's involvement with Julie improved, though only slightly. He'd ask about her now, though he rarely engaged directly, which was frustrating, but still, it was a step up from his previous neglect. Financially, we were in a better place, but Charles never once questioned where the extra money was coming from. That bothered me. How could he not wonder? Despite that, I saved most of what I earned and used the rest to cover our expenses. I was prepared to continue in this way until Julie turned 19, thinking that was the only option. Then one evening, Charles came home late. As usual, I asked about his day and mentioned that maybe he should spend more time with Julie to make up for his absences. His response was dismissive and disheartening. He claimed he couldn't, citing a big project at work. The pattern of excuses and detachment continued, and I realized it was time for me to seriously reevaluate our future together. Charles suggested hosting a dinner to motivate his colleagues to finish a project. Curious, I asked if it would be just his colleagues or if their families would be included. He told me it would be an adults-only gathering, inviting only their wives. I expressed concern about Julie and whether we needed a babysitter. Charles, however, dismissed it, saying we could just put her to bed early. When I asked if I should dress up for the dinner, Charles immediately said no. He insisted he wanted it to be a casual event, to avoid seeming pretentious. I agreed, though I was already feeling uneasy. The next day, I went shopping to pick up ingredients for the dinner. As the evening approached, I felt a ball of nerves in my stomach, trying to present our marriage in the best light. To my surprise, every single guest, including Charles, arrived dressed in elegant attire. Charles had told me not to dress up, but I now realized it was a deliberate oversight, leaving me feeling underdressed and embarrassed. The evening progressed without incident, until a moment occurred that I will never forget. While serving dinner, one of Charles's colleagues asked me who I was. With unsettling ease, Charles introduced me as Julie's nanny. His words struck me like a cold shock, stirring a rage inside me that I had never felt before. I wanted to correct him immediately, but instead, I retreated, overwhelmed by humiliation and betrayal. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, and I spent it isolated, overhearing the laughter and chatter of the guests, all of which deepened my sense of indignation and hurt. After the guests left, Charles came into our bedroom as though nothing had happened, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. His lie not only insulted me, but it also made me question the very foundation of our relationship. I waited for him to address what had happened, but he acted as though everything was normal, going through his usual routine. It wasn't until he was comfortably in bed that he noticed my silence and asked if I was upset with him. His obliviousness was astonishing. "Are you really asking me that, after what you said tonight?" I challenged. He seemed genuinely confused, asking what he could have possibly said to upset me. When I confronted him about calling me Julie's nanny, his response was dismissive, as if it was no big deal. I should have understood why Charles did it, but I couldn't bring myself to. I demanded an explanation, desperate to make sense of his actions. His justification was nothing short of shocking. He admitted that he found it embarrassing to acknowledge I was a stay-at-home mom. He feared it made us look outdated and dependent, especially when the wives of his colleagues were all employed. He argued that my staying at home made us seem less progressive, especially in the eyes of his friends, who valued the independence and careers of their partners. I was stunned. How could my contribution to our family, my managing everything at home, be seen as weakness or dependency? I reminded him that I was the one handling everything, cooking, cleaning, taking care of Julie, and that had nothing to do with being dependent on him. But Charles insisted that my lack of income was a source of embarrassment for him. His words stung, deeply unfair and contradictory. After all, it was his idea for me to stay at home in the first place. What followed was a heated argument about values and appearances. Charles asked me to simply go along with his fabricated narrative, for the sake of his reputation. His dismissal of my feelings, and his request for me to support his lie, was the last straw. I was hurt, frustrated, and furious, but I agreed to play along, though I warned him he might regret asking me to do so. I grabbed an extra pillow and retreated to Julie's room, seeking refuge from Charles's demeaning perspective on our family dynamic. That night, I found little comfort other than the quiet release of tears as I processed the hurt he had inflicted. His words echoed in my mind, deepening the wound to my self-esteem. It became painfully clear, I couldn't let this cycle of disrespect continue, not just for my sake, but for Julie's, too. I couldn't allow her to grow up thinking that such behavior was acceptable in any relationship. The next morning, after dropping Julie off at school, I walked into a divorce lawyer's office. It felt surreal, but strangely, I also felt a sense of relief at the thought of a future free from Charles's demeaning attitude. I gathered all the necessary financial documents, including records of my inheritances and investments, and waited for the divorce papers to be prepared. Once everything was in order, I devised a plan to confront Charles publicly. I arranged a meeting, pretending it was for business purposes, and invited him and his colleagues, none of whom knew the true agenda. When the meeting began, Charles's confusion was evident. I seized the opportunity to set the record straight, addressing the group and exposing the lie he had told about me being just Julie's nanny. Charles tried to dismiss the situation, but my resolve only grew stronger. I revealed a personal account he wasn't aware of, shocking everyone, including him, by displaying its substantial balance. This dramatic revelation served two purposes. It corrected his false narrative and publicly denounced his shallow, disrespectful behavior toward me. Charles's weak attempts to justify himself fell flat. His admission that he lied out of panic did nothing to salvage his dignity. I turned his own words against him, pointing out the irony of his claim that I was financially dependent on him. The unfolding drama made it clear. By exposing his hypocrisy, I not only reclaimed my dignity, but also highlighted the fundamental importance of respect and truth in any relationship. This public confrontation was a decisive step in ending a marriage that had been tainted by superficial judgments and disrespect. In that moment, I laid bare the truth to everyone present. Charles had reduced my role to that of a nanny in front of his colleagues to avoid the embarrassment of admitting that I, his wife, was the one managing the household while he focused solely on his career. He had been comfortable boasting about his financial contribution, as though it were the only one that mattered. My declaration that he had turned me into a nanny in his colleagues' eyes was the final blow. Without waiting for a private discussion, the truth was out, and so was the marriage. I handed Charles the divorce papers then and there. "Julie and I will be leaving this house by this weekend," I declared, making it clear there was no turning back. His obsession with having a wife he could boast about, rather than a partner, had led us to this point. His actions had humiliated me beyond repair, and no amount of explanation or pleading could change my mind now. Read myself for the inevitable argument. I refused to let him have any power over me anymore. I thanked his colleagues for their time and left the room, determined not to hear any more of his excuses. I rushed to pick up Julie, wanting to find refuge before the confrontation I knew was coming. Once home, I double-checked that everything important was packed and prepared myself for the inevitable argument. I refused to let him have any power over me anymore. True to form, Charles arrived home shortly after, seething with anger. He demanded to know why I had made such a public statement. I remained calm, explaining that it was a message to him and to everyone else about the importance of respect in a relationship, something he had long forgotten. He was more concerned about his tarnished reputation than the well-being of our family. Even now, with our marriage ending, his priorities remained twisted, focused solely on how others viewed him. I pointed out the irony of his concern for his image when he had been living a lie. Despite not working outside the home, I had contributed financially to our household, something he had never questioned or appreciated. His indifference to anything but his social standing was the final confirmation that we were no longer compatible. I told him that he and his reputation could face the future without us. My priority was creating a healthy environment for Julie and myself, far removed from the toxic dynamics that had defined our marriage. As I stood firm, the realization set in that our journey together had come to an end. A new chapter awaited Julie and me, one grounded in respect, truth, and freedom. With everything packed and ready, I was prepared to leave. Charles's threat to fight for custody in court didn't faze me. I calmly reminded him that I had accumulated 4 years of documentation highlighting his absence as a parent. Despite his attempts to make me out to be the villain, I knew the truth: Julie would stay with me. Charles accused me of trying to ruin his life over a single comment, but I made it clear that his remark was merely the tipping point. His continuous mistreatment and disregard for me had been ongoing, and the comment at dinner was just the latest example of how little he valued me. When he lashed out, calling me insane and questioning my mental state, I saw it for what it was: his inability to face the truth. I told him this was an opportunity for self-reflection, hoping he might finally understand the depth of his actions. I left him with one final remark: enduring his insults for years made his current humiliation feel insignificant. I gathered Julie and prepared to leave. As we drove away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The end of our family wasn't something I had ever wanted, but I knew it was necessary. I wasn't to blame for how things had turned out, but the weight of the situation still sat heavily on my heart. Julie, however, seemed largely unaffected. She had rarely interacted with Charles due to his frequent absences, so the change didn't disrupt her as much as I had feared. In fact, her excitement about our fresh start was infectious. We settled into a new condo I had purchased, and Julie's joy over her new room brought a warmth I hadn't felt in years. This move wasn't just about a new home, it was the beginning of a new life, free from the shadow of a controlling spouse. Securing a new job came easier than I expected, largely due to the unexpected support I received from some of Charles's former colleagues. After the public incident, they reached out with offers of help, enabling me to land interviews with prestigious companies. Meanwhile, Charles faced professional isolation, and his colleagues distanced themselves, leading to his eventual resignation from his stagnating career. The divorce proceedings were intense, with Charles fighting for custody. But armed with undeniable evidence of his lack of involvement and Julie's wish to stay with me, the court's decision was straightforward. I chose not to pursue any of Charles's assets or wealth. I wanted nothing more than to sever our ties completely and start fresh on my own terms. A year has passed since those tumultuous days, and looking back, I occasionally reflect on everything that transpired. The memory of Charles's public reckoning still brings a sense of triumph and a smile to my face, reaffirming my decision to pursue a happier, more fulfilling life, for Julie and for myself.